Okay, so assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I just came here for some pizza. I don't know what this is about. They told me there's going to be food here, so I came. But anyway, um, I actually, in all seriousness, alhamdulillah, I'm very honored to be here. Actually, I was asked multiple times, have you ever been to Switzerland before? I don't remember that I have, but I actually have been when I was 4 years old. My dad brought me here. I remember nothing. So this will probably jog some memories from my unsubconscious from many, many years ago. But in any case, what I wanted to share with you is this evening, I didn't come for the intention or with the intention to teach so much. I want to have a discussion. And the college setting is actually a very interesting setting for that purpose. So I'd like to, first of all, request that we turn the lights back on so it doesn't facilitate the kind of sleep that those two people are enjoying. So, I'm kidding, I'm just kidding. Okay, very good. That's still a little too romantic. Just turn it up a little. Okay, good. All right. So yeah, I'm interested in discussion. There are some ideas I do want to share with you, but I'm also, more than anything else, what intrigued me about coming here is the desire to learn. I want to understand some perspectives from young people, Muslim and non-Muslim, from all over the world, about this alleged battle of faiths, or this alleged battle between people of religion and people that don't believe in religion, and this clash, or this alleged clash of civilization, which personally I am not a believer in. I think this is entirely a mythical creature that we have aggrandized. We've made it far bigger than it actually is, and it's created a lot of problems for people all over the world, regardless of their faith. So in the beginning of this talk, I want to share with you a simple story from the Quran that I hold very dear. It's actually part of the story I shared with an audience in London as well. And hopefully, as I share this story with you, you will see its relevance to our conversation. Then, of course, after that, inshallah, I'll share with you some thoughts, my own personal thoughts. This is not the expression of our religion. This is based on my own analysis after traveling and lots of discussions with people from various different backgrounds. I have certain observations about Muslims in the West. And when we say the word West, we actually mean quite a few things, because that spans for many people, perhaps all of Europe. It perhaps spans the entire United States, maybe even South America. It may even span Australia, and so it's a large part of the world that we're talking about, which clearly is politically very different. It's culturally very diverse, and the situations of people are very, very different from these things. So making sweeping comments about just Muslims in the West is kind of difficult, because it's not, one situation isn't the same as the next. As a matter of fact, I just spent a week in London, or actually all over the UK, and I can notice a difference as soon as I get here. So I can tell that it's not all the same. So you can't just say Muslims in the West have a certain kind of life. It's really not that simple. But anyway, we begin with a story from the Quran. And actually, even before I start that story, I want to tell you that a Christian story. A story that occurs, according to most Christian historians, after Jesus and before the advent of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Commonly in Christian tradition, especially among the Jacobite churches and some Greek churches, this story is known as the sleepers of Ephesus, or the 7 youth of Ephesus. So there's the city of Ephesus, which is currently assumed to be in Turkey, where there were a group of young men who refused to accept the religious demands of their king. So the brief version of the story is that the king, who was actually a believer in Greek mythology and Greek gods, was visiting the city of Ephesus, and when he came, he set up monuments for Zeus and for Apollo and for Artemis, Artemis being the god of that city, the patron god of Ephesus. And when he set up these statues, these altars, he expected the entire population to come and pay their respects to this altar. So they had to show their respect to this altar. And these young men, this is not again from the Muslim account, this is from the Christian account. These young men refused to abide by the demands of that king. And they refused to pay their respect. And this wasn't just religious defiance. You have to understand, when you refuse a king's command, even if he's telling you to do something religious, this becomes a political situation. So they were getting themselves in political trouble. And thus, these young men are arrested. They get arrested and they are to be tried for treason and be killed. But somehow these young men, some say they were 7 in number, they escape. They get away and they hide in a cave. When they go hide in a cave, soon after, the king actually discovers them. He finds them, and as a punishment, he buries them alive in the cave. He has the mouth of the cave closed, covered up with rocks, and they're killed off. Okay, so, and of course the story goes on from there that many years later, some Christian scholars argue 40 years later, some argue 370 years later, some argue 200 years later, a shepherd he needed some rocks to build a shed for his sheep, and he moved some of those rocks, and sunlight went in, and miraculously these young people were actually, they woke up, and they were alive, and this was considered a miracle. And this is around the time of the Christian king Theodosius. So by this time, the Greek sort of worldview, the mythological worldview had dissipated in Christendom, and Christianity had now spread. And so when these people came out, the word of them spread, and it was a huge thing, and now they were celebrated as 7 saints. Soon afterwards, they died. Actually, to this day, there are churches that have murals of the 7 sleepers of Ephesus. If you look for images of the 7 sleepers, you'll find pictures of churches that are still even around today that have paintings of them. Now, this is important to note only because I give you all of this background for just one simple reason. These are considered heroes of the Christian tradition. These young men are considered spiritual heroes of the Christian tradition. They're considered saints. Actually, in some churches, they have a day of the feast celebrating these saints, the 7 saints of Ephesus. And in some others, the site itself is considered holy. People go there to pray. So and many hymns are sung. The Syriac churches in the Arab world have had many, many songs about the sleepers of Ephesus. Now, I tell you all of this for a reason. Because these people are actually mentioned in the Quran. They're talked about in the Quran. Anyone here know what they're called in the Quran? Yeah, they're called Ashabul Kahf, the people of the cave. They're called the people of the cave. And there's actually a few passages dedicated to their heroism. And even some disagreement with the Christian account. But what's remarkable to me, I'm not here to compare the two stories. That's inshallah a study for another time. But what I want to share with you is the Quran acknowledges the most important parts of what otherwise was legend, but for me as a believer, now Allah is giving me the accurate version of what happened, what actually happened with these people. And of those things, what I find really particular and really relevant to my circumstance is the fact that these young men are described as scared. They were scared and they ran for their life. But before they're described as scared and they were running, actually, the first thing we learn is they're running towards a cave, which is similar to the Christian account, isn't it? So the story in the Quran begins, they're running towards a cave. They're hiding and they're seeking refuge and they're praying to God for refuge. إِذْ أَوَى الْفِتْيَةُ إِلَى الْكَهْفِ فَقَالُوا رَبَّنَا آتِنَا مِنْ لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً وَهَيِّئْ لَنَا مِنْ أَمْرِنَا رَشَدًا. It's the very beginning of the account. They turn to the cave, they're running towards it, they're trying to seek refuge, and they turn to God and they say, Master, give us some special mercy, special love from you. We need to get away from this tyrant king and change our situation for us. That's what they say. Now, you would think the first thing you hear about them is that they're running away and they're scared for their life. But actually, as the story progresses, this is actually a story of bravery. This is not a story of cowardice and running away. It's actually a story of bravery. And their bravery is not that they fought a king. This is important to note. Their bravery isn't that they stood up to the king and they fought with him. Their bravery, as described in the Quran, is that they believed in something and they were not afraid to express it. They believed in something, and it wasn't, no matter what the consequences, they were willing to stand up and say, this is what we believe. I don't care if you find it treason. I don't care if you find it disgusting. I don't care if you find it offensive. This is my faith. And here's what I believe. I am not trying to tell you to believe it. That is your decision. I am not imposing my will on you. That is your call. You have to make your own decisions. But here's what I believe, and here's why I believe it, and I will not be made to feel guilty or inferior or less than anyone else because of what I believe. As a matter of fact, when you ask us to worship and show our respects to these false gods, هَؤُلَاءِ قَوْمٌ اتَّخَذُوا مِن دُونِهِ آلِهَةً. لَوْلَا يَأْتُونَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِسُلْطَانٍ بَيِّنٍ. They turned the conversation around. Cute baby, that's a cute baby. Why does she have a soda? Baby shouldn't have sodas. Anyway, that's crazy. Anyway, what was I talking about? I completely forgot. It's a baby. Something about... لَوْلَا يَأْتُونَ عَلَيْهِمْ بِسُلْطَانٍ بَيِّنٍ. How come you people are questioning us for not showing respect to the king and not bowing before these idols and not bowing before these statues? How come you don't provide any reasonable evidence for why we should? How come the only reason you provide is you must obey the king? You must be like everyone else. You must fit in. Why does that have to be the case? That doesn't seem like reasonable to me. That seems like a form of bullying. That doesn't seem reasonable. In other words, when they are made to stand trial, instead of starting with, no, we love the king too. We're not that bad. Sorry, we made a mistake. They're not apologizing for who they are. And yet at the same time, they're not declaring war against the king. From the linguistic analysis of these ayat, one of the lessons that are drawn is هَؤُلَاءِ قَوْمُنَا. These people are our nation. These people are our nation. Now that statement itself suggests that they have loyalty to their people. And even if you have loyalty to your people, it does not mean you have to think like them and look like them and talk like them and worship like them. You can love people and not be the same as them. It is fine. We don't have to be monolithic in the world. We can be different. As a matter of fact, God purposely made us different. It's our creed. وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. He made you different, nations and tribes, people that need one another, people that are distinguished from one another for a very particular reason, so that you can appreciate each other and know each other. That is the diversity of this world. Actually, for many Muslim theologians, the idea of human beings belonging to different races, having different languages, having different cultures, having different beliefs even, is like a garden that has different flowers. If all the flowers in the world were exactly the same, it would be pretty boring. It would be pretty boring. If all the colors were the same, it would be pretty boring, you know? So you have this idea of diversity being appreciated in the sacred text. Now, I wanted to start with this because I come from, if you didn't notice already, I come from the United States. I was raised in, most of my adult life I have spent in New York City. About 5.5 years ago, I moved to Texas. Yes, pew pew, Texas. I thought it was going to be like that too. But it's not. I'm really disappointed. You know, I'll tell you, on the side note, you know, I got to keep you awake, so I'll tell you a story. Some people in Texas, Texas, mashallah, like our city where I come from in Dallas is the 4th biggest airport apparently, or 6th biggest in the world. It's crazy. It's like every 2 minutes, every 1 minute there's a flight leaving. So it's a very international city. But there are parts of Dallas where there are people that live there and they've lived there for generations, and these are true Texans. They've never even left Texas. Like they've never even left their town. Like for them, going to Houston is the big city. Like it's different for them. So one of those guys is my barber. So I go to this guy and he cuts my hair. My haircut is called low maintenance, by the way. So you walk in and you say, I need low maintenance. But anyway, so he and I have some fun conversation. So when I told him I'm from New York, when I first moved there, he said, wow, what's that like? And I started, describing it to him and whatever. And he goes, what do you do? I was like, well, I teach Arabic. And he just stopped, his machine stopped for a second. And then he paused for a second, and then he said something really interesting. Arabic, they speak that in Korea, right? Is that North or South Korea? And I said North. So, anyway, that was a little bit about Texas. But what I do want to tell you is, me personally, I have no problems saying that I am absolutely in love with the United States. It is my country, it is my home, it is the place where I actually acquired not only my secular education, it is the place where I discovered my religion. It is the place where I learned the Arabic language. I never traveled to the Arab world to learn the Arabic language. I learned Arabic in New York City. It is the place where I started my family. It is the place where I'm raising my children. It is the place where I've met teachers, friends. It is the place where I've started my institution, where I'm able to help others build. It is the place where I do most of the recordings that you find on YouTube that you benefit from. There's no reason for me not to love the United States. And it doesn't in any way, shape, or form take away from my faith. It doesn't in any way, shape, or form it reduces my Islam in any way to me. Not at all. I don't see these two things as mutually exclusive. Now, does that mean that every policy of the United States I adopt because I love my country? No. As a matter of fact, being American, part of being American is the right to express freely your difference of opinion, even if it be with your government. And though I agree with some things in my government, I disagree with some things, and I have the right to express that, and that's part of what makes my experience as a Muslim living in the West so joyful. As a matter of fact, I appreciate that so much because there are so many Muslims living in the Muslim world, and if they were to express their political opinion, they could lose their life. That's a serious matter. So I appreciate that freedom that I enjoy. I appreciate the freedom to be able to go to my mosque, to be able to pray, to be able to, then after I come out of my mosque, to walk over into a church and hang out with the minister. I have no problem with that. I appreciate the ability to go out to lunch with a rabbi and eat at a kosher restaurant of our choice. I appreciate these things. I think that's beautiful, personally. I've learned a lot about my own faith by talking to people of other faiths. But unfortunately, a version of Islamic thought, which I wouldn't even qualify as Islamic really, is propagated among people in which either you have to pick loyalty to your country or loyalty to your religion. If you have one, you cannot have the other. And this is absurd. This is ridiculous. Our religion teaches us values. It teaches us principles. Our loyalty is to principles. Let me give you a silly example to make the point across that I'm trying to say, okay? And then I want to hear your thoughts on this, okay? On the one hand, I love my wife. And on the other hand, I love my mother. I know in Pakistan they make you pick. But everywhere else, is it possible you can love both? Is it? Is it possible you can love your son and your daughter? Is it possible you can love I know it's hard, but your uncle and your cousin? It is possible, and one doesn't exclude the other, does it? But if one of them is wrong, one of them says something wrong, one of them does something wrong, and you, out of your love, say, I shouldn't say anything. I should just be quiet, because I love mom. So even though mom is wrong, mom is saying something incorrect. Even though my wife is doing something wrong, I shouldn't say anything because I love her too much. That is injustice. That's injustice. As a matter of fact, speaking out for the truth and correcting even a loved one, in Islam, the Prophet ﷺ told us, you have to help your brother, unsur akhaka zaliman aw mazluman. When the Prophet said that, some people who were listening to him got confused. Here's what he said: help your brother whether he's a wrongdoer or he's the victim of wrongdoing. I'll repeat myself. Help your brother even if he's a wrongdoer and even if he is a victim of wrongdoing. Now people, when they hear that, they're like, what? So some people asked him, what do you mean help your brother when he's a wrongdoer? Like if my brother's beating somebody up, I go help him and kick some more with him? Like, what do you mean? So he says you help your brother who does wrong by stopping him from doing wrong. That is you helping your brother who does wrong. In other words, my brother who I love, an act of love for him is that I speak out against the wrong that he's doing. But when I speak out against the wrong that he's doing, he might find it offensive. Isn't that true? My brother might be angry at me and might not realize that doesn't change the fact that I'm not angry. I'm doing this out of love. I'm concerned for my brother. He's heading down the wrong path, which will hurt him. And so I feel obligated to the best of my ability to try to advise in a loving way as best I can. Now here's the next part. loving advice.